is the co-founder of ClimateTech VC. Hi, Sophie. Good to see you in virtual life.
Good morning. Nice to see you last week. IRL.
Good morning. Yeah, good to see you here. And I may be able to hint it as well. You're working on a venture fund in the climate space. Maybe you can tell us more about that in a second. But I'll hand over to you, and really excited to get a good introduction to what the state of climate tech today, where we're at, where are the trends, and where maybe our blind spots in the ecosystem. So over to you.
No doubt. Well, thanks for having me. I was so incredibly amazed to hear about how many folks are signed up and registered for this event, including from all over the world. And I think that is reflective in part of our readership as well here at a publication called ClimateTech VC, CTVC. We kind of do what it says on the label, right? So we write a publication that goes out twice a week to now almost 40,000 readers. And these folks also sit internationally and kind of, spin seats from innovators or folks that might want to one day be innovators coming out of labs or academia, all the way through to current founders of small to big companies, folks that sit in innovation seats, but inside of big corporates, through to the investors, which is a hat that I myself wear, government seats, etc. Everyone's kind of here working together on climate tech. Myself and my partner Kim started this newsletter just about 3 years ago at this point. If you can remember back that far, that's at the kind of beginning of the pandemic. And we started this as a bit of a passion project. No one had really slapped that label of calling this space climate tech yet onto anything. And we kind of saw the future there and got started with what was a humble blog and has now really become this industry-leading publication. Stay tuned for more things to come from the CTVC front in the near future as well. And then you alluded to it, but I've been putting my money where my mouth is, angel investing and supporting many of these early stage founders that we write about through my personal means, and am now excited to put more structure around that, supporting pre-seed and seed founders with a new fund structure. So stay tuned, but that's not what this morning's all about. We're here to talk about the state of the state. So the state of climate tech. We're data nerds. A large part of what we do at ClimateTech VC with the team is track all of the deal activity in the space. That used to be a pretty simple undertaking. It would be about 5 deals a week or so, and we were really excited when we'd find any. Now it's a complete and overwhelming onslaught, and we couldn't be more thrilled, right? So just last week, we tracked about $1 billion worth of funding into what you could argue is venture climate. That took like a full year, just a couple of years ago, to reach that level. So massive inflection point. But we can dig right into that. So I'm gonna share some data and slides here. Let's do this. All right. Hoping that folks can see my slides on the state of climate VC. This is myself and Kim. We write the newsletter along with a team of about 20 volunteers who are really hardworking and have various different perspectives on the climate space. And this is what the newsletter does very quickly. So we're now about 40,000 subscribers. You can follow us on Mondays for the news that you need to know to get your week started and track all of those deals. And then on Friday, we kind of kick off creativity for your weekend with these market deep dives and funding insights. These are really dense pieces of analytical work that you can feel free to reference and go back to now that we've written nearly 100 of these insights over the past 3 years. Think anything from deep dives into the carbon market to analysis of the IEA's latest funding report, etc. And then we have these capital stacks. Now, this is for all of you folks that might be out there raising funding or wanting to raise funding in the future, or maybe for fellow venture investors who want to know who's really doing the thing. Who are the climate tech VCs? We've gone ahead and curated that list, again, analytically based, of the 200 or so most active thesis-driven climate VCs. We hope that saves you a whole lot of time when you're out there trying to be active in the climate venture space. So that's an overview. Let's get into what is climate tech. Big question. We get asked this all the time, and let's be real. I don't have a perfect answer, but what I do know is climate is a theme. not an industry. And we see these 7 different verticals as the places where a majority of the climate activity, which is related to decarbonization and resource efficiency use, split out. Some of these might be more or less familiar to you, but keep in mind these 7 as we go through the rest of the slides. And just to get you excited, there are a ton of different ways that you can work on climate. This is a smattering of them right here. And on the next slide, we're going to talk about how that splits out and relates to impact areas. So on the left-hand side of this slide, we've split out global greenhouse gas emissions by economic sector according to the US EPA's categorization. It's always a little bit tricky to manipulate this data, but we like the way that this splits out and we think it kind of holds up. So as you'll see, we've got the power sector, agriculture, and industry as the major buckets of greenhouse gas global emissions. And then on the right-hand side of the slide, this is our proprietary data that we've worked really hard to go scrape based off of deal by deal activity. And depending on whether you're, a full cup of coffee or 2 in, or I don't know, a generally glass half full type of person, you could squint and say, hey, this lines up pretty well, right? The areas of innovation and the level of activity does indeed line up with the greenhouse gas activity. But if you flip to the next slide where we hold that emissions data the same, but rather than looking at deals, we look at dollars deployed, the picture changes pretty dramatically. And what sticks out to me like a sore thumb here is transportation. So on a relative basis, right, we see that transportation is hypothetically over-invested from a venture capital dollars deployed perspective, whereas something like industrials are a heavy emitter, but maybe under-invested from a venture capital perspective. So this is just kind of food for thought as we flow through the rest of the slides. But let's get into it. There's no climate silver bullet. We know that, we're maybe still looking for it, but the founders are out there doing something about it. So founders have taken almost now 2,000 what we call shots on goal. So companies started and that they fundraised for to solve this climate crisis. This slide is a personal favorite of mine as a recovering management consultant. This helps you see those 7 sectors that we've talked about before, but their relative size compared to one another. And not just that, but also within those verticals, what sectors, so what specific areas are the most active? And that's the size of the rectangle, right? So you might be interested to note that alternative proteins and foods are really well represented, EV charging, fleet management, micromobility, etc. But maybe you're surprised that, relatively speaking, compared to all of the conversation and hype, maybe CDR activity is actually a pretty small relative rectangle. But again, what really jumps out, and this is the second time we've done this flip now, if we go from venture-backed count of companies to dollars deployed, like, wow, that 80% or so of all dollars deployed here really, smacks you across the head a little bit with so much funding going into just 3 sectors, and that's transportation, energy, food, and land use. Over the past 2 years or so, and keep in mind we're due to put out an update to the report at the end of this year, which is coming up, we've tracked 70 billion, it's closer to almost 100 at this point, going into just venture capital climate deals. And that's followed a pretty static, kind of steady growth line. And you rarely see this, right, in different markets. This is truly a climate growth story. On the right-hand side, it's count of companies, and that's going up steadily, about 20% quarter over quarter of new founders, new companies coming into the space. And then on the dollar side, there's a little bit of a story to be told about when the market downturn happened around the start of this year, that climate funding shrunk for a quarter. Safe to say that's definitely rebounded. And what happened there was the particular type of deal that dropped off were those $500 million plus mega deals. So think the ones that are kind of pre-SPAC or pre-IPO or super growth round, those dried up for that quarter. And that's just worth knowing. We like to get nerdy and get into the details here to tell you the complete story. And it's worth being aware of. But when it comes to the dry powder in the market for early stage climate founders, we're sitting pretty. There's ample dry powder to go around. Not all of these sectors are the same stage. So there's a difference in the relative maturity across different sectors. We saw this before with transportation, energy, food, and land use being the kind of biggest sectors. But from a venture capital, early stage investors perspective, I get really excited about all of the seed deal activity that's happening in the other sectors like climate management, carbon, industry, and built environment. So that's a quick overview of what's happening on the deal side. It takes two to tango. So let's talk about who are these climate tech VCs. Feel free to take a little scan of that URL code or type into your browser ctvc.co/running list, and you'll find our list of about 200 climate tech VCs that are the most active funds in the space. Like I said before, ample climate dry powder. We're talking about very conservatively well over 20 billion ready to deploy into early stage climate founders. And again, that's being quite conservative based off of the about 90 new funds that have been announced over the past 2 years that are ready to go deploying explicitly into climate founders. Final slide to wrap up everything here. We see about 6 different trends for why there's really never been a better time to be a climate tech entrepreneur. The tech advances driving down costs in solar and wind, primarily driven by advances from Clean Tech 1.0, lay the foundation for us to now go look at things like food and land use, right? Climate management that previously were too far outside that energy strike zone to really count as climate tech. Now we can build off of that cheaper, better, faster, cleaner, clean energy generation. The second is kind of a tough one, but we feel it, right? Climate's on our doorsteps. We vote with our forks, we vote with our dollars because we feel it, whether that's wildfires or droughts or floods. It's now impossible to deny the climate reality. The third one's a bit of a lagging indicator, but it can't be avoided. Climate policy's here, it's real, it's got teeth, and we're going to hear a whole lot more about it next week from COP. Corporate demand is pulling forward that supply of climate innovation that previously might have been there, but not really had a market to pull it forward. Corporate demand, when we can think about framing that as either from a mandatory side of the risks that these corporates are feeling, or from a voluntary side of them signing on to net zero pledges, that pull is accelerating the market almost certainly. And then the climate capital stack has really not only gotten deeper and broader, but it's sophisticated. So these are funds, like we talked about before, that are specifically set up for investing in climate founders, but they span from early stage venture all the way through to debt, capital, infrastructure, et cetera, including government financing that's specifically tailor-made for climate. And then the one that gets me the most excited is folks like you showing up to events like this. So the talent density is just absolutely phenomenal and gets me up and out of bed every morning. Everybody wants to work on climate these days and align their values with kind of playing venture with their career. And there's an opportunity out there really for everybody. You don't have to be a scientist to work on climate, and there's no better place to start than coming to events like this. So with that, gonna flip back to the event, and let's see, ready to answer any questions or take the cue from Maiko.